Okay, we're back. It's lesson 4, part 3. So we've got our category form and save pages up. Those are up on GitHub if you need them. Thanks to everybody who shared some code. So now I want to modify my form, my items form. So we've got a drop down. So I'm going to open up item details, our form. So here's our simple form. So I'm going to add one more field set on here. We need to modify the form and we need to modify the save page to include the category. So we'll add another field set and we'll add a label for the, I'm going to call it category ID because that matches the column in our items table. Our label will just say category. And then we built the drop-down list last week. We built this page. So we're going to kind of use similar code. So we built this, what did we call it? Select an item. Right? We used a PHP query. We added an HTML select box. And then we used a query to go and select the list of items. And then we rendered them in option tags. So we're going to kind of do a similar thing, but we're not displaying a list of items here. We want to display a list of categories. So we'll add a select, name equals category ID, and ID is also equal to category ID. And I'll close my tag. PHP Storm nicely generates the closing tag for me. So now I'm going to open a set of PHP tags. In here, we want to connect to the database. We want to fetch the list of categories and then add each category as an option to our drop-down list. So I'll connect to the database using PDO. So exact same code we've used a bunch of times already. So our database name is the same as our username. We're using MySQL and our AWS host 172.312243. I'll add my username and my password. If you want, you can copy the line from the other file. I like typing it because now I know it, and I know it from by heart. We're going to set up a query, right? So we want to select star from categories. I should maybe add some comments here. Connect. Set up query to fetch categories. We don't need any parameters. We want all the categories. Yep, that's right, Megan. I've typed it enough times that I've internalized it. I used to have a sticky note on my second monitor with it last semester, but it was also, I used the same credential. For AWS, yes. Although, honestly, Chris, I don't actually think you guys are going to use AWS after this semester. Next semester, when we're doing Microsoft, the AWS server, it doesn't support ASP.NET. So we're going to be using Microsoft's Azure Cloud Service next semester in the fall. And you'll actually set up your own credentials for Azure. So then we want to set up and execute the command. So we'll create our command variable. Just like we did before, we'll prepare our SQL statement combined with our database connection. We'll call execute to actually run the query. And I'll create a variable called categories. And we can call, coming back to Adil's question from earlier, we can call fetch all so that it runs our query, fetches the list of categories. Okay, so we're connecting to the database, we're setting up the query we want to execute, we're preparing it, running it, calling fetch all to get the list of, to get an array, and then we're storing the results. I will share the code on Pastebin in a minute. If you get behind, don't panic. Or if you have a question, if you need me to slow down, just let me know, okay? So then we want to loop through the results, adding each category to the drop-down list. So we're going to loop through categories. I'll just use a variable called maybe C, nice and short. So categories is our full list, and C will be an individual category. So inside my loop, we're going to echo out an option tag and say value equals. So we want to use the category ID as the value, and the category name we want to be displayed in the drop-down list. So the users don't see the IDs, but when they choose a category, we're actually going to store that ID. So put in a double quote and then a single quote. So our value will be the category ID. And then we're going to append on the category name. So inside our loop, we're going to add a new option tag with the value equal to the category ID, and the text inside the opening and closing tag, the text will be the actual name of the category. So it'll say produce or dairy or bakery. The IDs will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this all happens inside our select box. So I'm just going to save this. I'm going to check it out in the browser. If it looks right, I'll post the code up on paste of code if you need it. So I'm going to toggle away from my code editor for a minute so I can see if this actually is working properly. So I'm going to refresh. We get a drop-down list with the categories. So this is the result we want. There's one way we could make this a little more user-friendly. What could we do to improve this list? It is working, but I want to make one little upgrade. Any suggestions how we could make this better? Yeah, I think so, Chris. Let's sort it. When we give users a drop-down list, it's going to be easier to find things if it's alphabetical, even though it's not a very big list. So what could we do? How could we modify the code we're looking at so that it actually is displayed in alphabetical order? A few different ways. What would be the simplest way to do it? I'm thinking on line 26 we could do something. Yep, Jacob, I like this suggestion. That's what I'm thinking. So how would you change it? Great suggestion, Sammy. Thank you. So we can add order by. Adil, we could do it descending, but then we're going to have Z to A. So I just want to order by name. If you would like to sort it by name descending, you could. Typically, though, drop-downs on web applications, they're sorted in ascending order from A to Z. So I'm going to try it this way. I'm going to add order by name. I think that should pretty much do the trick. So now when I refresh, bakery appears first. So just a little easier to get through our list in this way. Okay. So I'm just I'll copy everything. Well, actually, I'll just copy the field set. So here's all the new stuff. I'll put this up on paste of code. I'll just take out my password. So make sure you change the database line. So if you need anything here for reference, it's in the chat. So we're going to connect to the database, fetch the list of categories in alphabetical order, set up and run the command and call fetch all, and then we're going to loop through to populate our dropdown. So you'll need to do this from your second table in your assignment. Your form is going to be used to save to one table, and the second table is going to be used to populate a dropdown list that gets embedded into the form. Does that make sense, or is anybody a bit confused about that or have questions? We're going to fill drop-down lists all the time in web applications, really common functionality that we need to know how to implement. So what's our next step? Our form looks good, but what will happen if I create a new item now? So let's say I need, I need half a dozen bagels. When I save this, what's the result going to be in the database? So I'll go ahead and save it. It says my item's saved. So I tried to save 6 bagels in the bakery category. Right. So if I go and look, I go and query my items table. Notice my bagels are saved. Right, Adil, absolutely. We haven't modified the save item page to include the category. So we need to add this. Adil, you've got it exactly right. So let's go to our save item page. And now we also want to add a new variable for the category ID. And we're going to get it from our form post, from our dropdown that also has the name of category ID. So let's add one more variable here. We also want to validate it. So add your new variable for category ID first. And then we're going to skip down below the validation of the quantity. We also want to validate the category ID. I can actually copy this validation. I'm going to copy the whole validation section for quantity because we want all the same checks. So if category ID is empty, we can say category is required. If it's not numeric, because we're not actually saving the name of the category, we're saving the ID. And same here. If category ID is less than 1, again, we'll throw an error. So I've just copied this all the validation rules around quantity, changed my variable 3 times for category ID. So that's our next step. We're making sure we have a valid category ID before we save. Can't save an item if it has no category. And now we need to modify this section. I'm going to add category ID into my SQL statement and add a third parameter, because when we're saving, we'll now have 3 parameters: name, quantity, and category ID. So I'm going to add the column and add a parameter with the same name. So I've added category ID here and here with a colon to indicate it's a parameter or placeholder. And now I'm going to add one more bind param statement to fill our new parameter. So the name is category ID. In camel case, it's going to be filled from our category ID variable. And like quantity, it's an integer. It has no length. The length is predefined by the int data type. So if ever we wanted to add more fields to the items table, and we will later, like we want to add something like a photo of the item, maybe. Again, we'd add a variable at the top for it. We'd add a new variable. We'd need to add the column to our insert column list. We'd add a new parameter in our value list, and we'd add one more bind param statement. The rest of our code could stay the same. So I'm going to save this. This, Mason, just to select. Oh, okay, so we can just select star from categories. So I used that category details and save category page that you guys built in your breakout groups and you shared the code. I've used those. I filled out the form 6 times and I've created 6 categories in my database. Right at the beginning of class with this script that was on D2L. So we ran, when we built the categories table, here was the lesson 4 in-class script. So it's on D2L for you, right? There's 2 commands here. Here's the create table categories. The second command we ran was alter table items, and it added the category ID. So if you haven't run this in Workbench, make sure you run this script. And that will generate the new category ID column. So that may have just been what you missed. Okay. No problem. So now I want to try this out. If I save, let's say I want some multigrain bread. I want 1 loaf. And now when I save this, now it's attaching the category ID. Notice it's not null here. So I'll go back and add something else. Maybe we'll buy a couple of lobsters. And I'll pick seafood. And now we can see the category ID showing up here. Now, eventually, we also want to show the categories here, right? In the list, we want to also include the category names, and then we could sort and filter by category. We're not going to do that today. We'll leave that part. And we'll do that sometime in the next week or two. But we don't need to do it for now. As long as when we're adding a new category, it gets added to the database. That's good enough for right now. Okay, I'm going to upload, again, I'll have to take out all my passwords, which is a bit of a pain, but I'm going to upload all my code to GitHub, and then I want to do a quick review of Git and GitHub before we go. Like I said, I want you all to be GitHub experts. And we'll talk about why in just a minute. Okay, so I will go. So I'm going to upload everything back to the repository. So L4 part 3, category drop down on item form. Okay, so all the code we've done today, it's now all uploaded to GitHub. But we want to talk about Git a bit. Just put all my changes back. Okay, so using the chat, just close up my project and open a file. What do you guys already know about Git and GitHub? Great job interview question. What's GitHub for? What's the point of it? Sharing code, version control, cloud saving? Yep. All of these things are true. Yeah, it's cloud software. It's for sharing with other developers. It's generally a repository for open source code. So that's where you typically find the source code for working with open source libraries. It's also a way of backing up your code. So as you're working on projects, as I'm working on a project, a deal for letting you work with other people. So it does all these things. So if your computer blows up, you should never say, I lost all my code. Because anytime you're done working for the day, your workflow should be upload to GitHub. You should assume if you lose your computer or it blows up, gets stolen, that all your code is backed up to GitHub. Okay. It lets us see changes and undo changes, and it lets us collaborate and merge code with other people. It is an industry standard. And employers told us for many years, you guys have a great curriculum, but we're hiring your students on co-op, we're hiring your grads, and they don't know GitHub, and they don't understand version control, and you guys need to fix that. So many of us in the department took that to heart, and we have enforced it, okay? So you guys know about it. So GitHub is not, Git is not the only version control system, but it is the industry standard. There are other cloud version control systems besides GitHub. GitLab is another common one. Bitbucket is one, but GitHub is the most common. So Git lets us archive, it creates versions, and it associates a timestamp and a user with every change. So we can compare, we can restore, we can merge versions. Okay. So it was originally developed in 2005 for Linux, but Git runs on any operating system. So one of the most common things employers say when they look at students and job candidates is they say they want to see your GitHub page. They want to see your project, see your code. So it's important that all your code is there. So it's here for the reasons we talked about, right? It lets us experiment, it lets us make mistakes and keep a separate version rather than every time we save a change, we're overwriting something. If we are working on multiple computers, all our code is backed up online and it lets us collaborate and debug. These slides are on D2L. I'm not going to go over all of it. Okay. So what we're going to do, I've already got my lamp food project up on GitHub. So I'm just going to make a new project. Why don't you open up, you can open up your lab one, the folder where you created lab one. And we're all going to put that up on GitHub. So I'm just going to make a new project. I'll call it lab one. So just open up, everybody's probably done lab one if you already have it. I'll just create an HTML file here. I'll call it lab1.html. You don't need to create a file, I just create something here. This is my lab one file. So what I want to do, I want to create a new repository. I'm going to make it private. I'm going to upload my code to GitHub. Then I'm going to make some changes and go through the process of pushing changes. And then we're going to look at the Readme file and talk about what that is. Okay, so how do we create a repository? So I'm going to go to GitHub. I'm going to create a new repository. And I'll just call this COMP1006G Lab1. Just has to be a unique name with no spaces. You can put in a description. I'm going to make my repository private. Don't choose anything else. We'll talk about the README in a minute. You don't really need to worry about git ignore for now. We'll work with git ignore next semester. Don't worry about the license. I just want an empty repository. So go ahead and create a repository, make it private. Click create. And then there's a few commands I'm going to run to upload my code to GitHub. I've published the commands on D2L for you. They are under tools and resources. Oops. The commands aren't complicated. No, you can't, Megan. You can make folders inside a repository. So the commands are here. So you've already configured Git. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make my htdocs lab1 folder. I want to make it a Git repository so Git will start watching for changes. So I'm going to open up my terminal here, and this takes me right to my lab1 folder, which is handy in PHP Storm. If you're in Visual Studio Code, what you can do is you can open the folder. I think there's an option to open this in File Explorer. Yes, you could choose open in or open in. If you open in File Explorer, you can then go into your lab1 and copy that URL. And then you can open your Mac Finder or your Windows command prompt. And you just do CD and paste. Now I've got to run it as an administrator, but easier to do within your code editor if you can. So I'll open my command prompt, 2 ways to get to the same place. So in my command prompt, I'll run cd and just paste in. So you can use the command prompt, or you can do this within your code editor. So the first command is to run the command git space init. And again, this is on D2L. Initialize Git. So Git will start watching for changes. And it says I've initialized an empty Git repository. And you notice it created this little .git. This is a hidden folder. So if I go here in Windows, it now has a little .git file. It means Git is watching. So that's our first command, git init. I now want to add my lab file. So my next command is git, and then a space, and then add, and then a dot. The dot is a wildcard, meaning all file names, all file extensions. So again, you can do this in your terminal within your code editor, or you can do it in your Mac OS terminal or Windows command prompt. Doesn't matter. So I'll type git add dot. Mason, yes, you can. It's not a bad idea to try this using the command prompt because otherwise, it's important you should know how to use Git for anything, right? If you're not using Java, like in some of your other classes where you're not using a JetBrains product, you still need to be able to use Git, right? Even if your instructor doesn't ask you to, you should be backing up and archiving your assignments on Git. So I think learning the commands, then it's totally independent of what language or platform you're using. So once you get comfortable, yeah, you might use some of these tools, but my recommendation is learn the commands because then you can go anywhere and do anything. So now I want to make a new version, which is called a commit, right? It's basically a snapshot of the project at this point in time. I'm going to run git commit -m for message. And your commit message should describe what changes you make. So in this case, I created lab.html. Right, I made this new file. I'll show you what this looks like in a real project. And I'll hit enter. So this now takes a local snapshot. So Git's watching, I've got a new version, but it's still only on my computer. My computer blows up, there's still nothing backed up here. So the commit messages should always be descriptive. Like I said, if in your assignment you put in like commit 1 or committed changes, you'll lose some marks for that. So what does this look like in a real project? So this started out as a student research project. So notice how many versions there are of this project. 282 commits over about the past 3 years. And you can see these are the commit messages, right? It's descriptive. So if we look at the code, we know what every version, we know what changes were made. It doesn't say commit 283, commit 284, which is totally useless. So the messages should always describe the work that was done in this version. So these 3 commands, the init we run only once in the repository. But then whenever we have changes, we run git add, git commit. I need to do 2 more things. I want to now connect this repository, connect this local Git archive to the Git repository I created on GitHub. So I'm going to type git remote add origin, and then I need to go and grab the URL of my repository. So I'll just go back. Here's my new repository. So I can just click copy here or copy it in the address bar. I'm going to copy this URL. Starts with HTTPS. And I'm just going to right click and paste. So this remote add origin, we only do this once per project. This connects our local Git archive to the GitHub repository we've created in the cloud. So they're now linked. and I'll hit enter. So now they're tied together. So to upload my changes, I can just do a git push. Push is an upload from our local machine to the cloud, to the origin repository, and it has a default branch called master. We won't really get into branches, but does anybody know what they are? Why would we have branches? What does it mean? We'll just work for now in the master branch. Close a deal. Yeah, oh, and you're getting warmer. Right, we can look at that. That's one way of using branches. Show you a couple different ways. Oh, and yeah, that's a good suggestion. So I'm going to upload by hitting enter. Okay, so Git is going to push. So it pushed to master. And now if I go back and refresh, yeah, Chris, you're on the right track. So now, here's my code, right? There's one commit. So there's a couple different ways we can use branches. And you guys have suggested both of them. So here's one way. So one way to use branching is when we're working on a feature. So this project has 9 branches. The master branch, this is the production branch. This is the live version of the site. We have a staging branch for testing. And then we had some different features. So the employer section, we were working on stuff. And then once we were done testing, we merged it into master. I had my own development branch, so I could play around and make changes without affecting the production branch. And when I was done my changes, again, I merged. And as Owen said, here's an example with multiple people. This was another student project. So we had 4 or 5 students working on this. And you can see we had different branches. Different developers had their own branches. So people could work on things independently from each other and then merge the changes when they were ready. So you could create branches based on different users or based on different features, as Chris and Owen suggested. Okay, so we're going to do 2 more quick changes with this before we finish for today. I'm going to make a change to my file. So if you have your lab 1, maybe you just want to add like an H1 tag on yours. I'll put a paragraph on mine and say, adding a paragraph for a second commit. So I'm going to make some changes and save them. So I'm going to go back to my terminal. I now want to add the files, make a new commit. So I'm going to make a second version, and then I'm going to upload or push my changes again. So I'm going to git add dot, add my files, git commit -m, added paragraph to lab.html. So I'm describing what I changed. Notice I didn't run the init again. You only need to run the init 1 time. And again, I don't need to now add my remote again. We only need to do that once per project. So to upload, I can just push my change. We're going to do one more quick change after this and we'll call it a day. So I'm going to push again. So I did git add, git commit, and git push. So when I do it the first time, I need 5 commands. All my other changes now, I only need 3 commands. Add, commit, and push. So this is just taking a second. Not sure why. Okay. Took a second to connect to GitHub. So it says it pushed again. And now when I go back to my repository and refresh it, so now I have 2 commits. I can see my latest commit message. And when I look here, it shows me the 2 commits. Notice they're timestamped to the minute. So I can tell if you've modified your repository after the due date. GitHub will show me. And if I click this version, it shows me in green what got added. So the first version didn't have this paragraph tag. So I can track my changes. If I break something, I can see what the old version looked like and even revert to it. So we're going to make one last change, which is our README file. What is a README file? Let's look at this repository. The README file is basically used to document a Git repository. So this is the README file here. We can write HTML formatting, and whenever we create a repository, we should put a README that describes what the repository is. So you need to do this in your assignment. And I want your README file to also include the link to your assignment, your AWS link. So I'm going to make one more file, and then I'll just show you a link for some additional help if you need it. So I'm going to make a new file, and the file name is readme.md. MD stands for Markdown. HTML is hypertext markup language. README is Markdown. It understands HTML. It also understands plain text in the same file. So create a file called readme.md. Any text editor can open it, Megan. So I'll create readme.md. So I'm just going to put in a heading here, COMP1006G Lab 1. So you can add HTML, you can add text. So now I'm going to do the same 3 commands again. I'm going to add, I'm going to commit, and I'm going to push again. I'll run git add dot, then git commit -m create readme. And then at the end, I will push to upload. Git push origin master. So you're going to notice a couple of changes in my repository under tools and resources. So under weekly learning, useful links, here's the Git commands right here. So I recommend doing them manually because the README is the documentation file for your repository. It describes what the project is. So in this repository, this is the README file. Here's all the code, but this is the README file describing what is in this project and also how to use the code. You have to create it, Ivan. It's not there. We just created a README file. So I made a new file. I called it readme.md, and I put this text inside it. And then I've done an add, a commit, and a push. I am recording this, so you can always review this part of the lesson. So now if I go back to my repository, we'll see two things. So notice now it shows the README file automatically at the bottom. This is a special name. GitHub looks for any file called readme.md and actually displays the content of the README below the list of files. So we can document what's in our project. And like these students have done, they've documented how to use the project. Here's the README here. Oh, we don't have one because this one's private. So when you're creating, so in your assignment, I would like you to create a README file as well. So this is the correct way to upload to GitHub. I do not want to see people dragging and dropping files, because when you do that, GitHub just says added files by upload. There's no descriptive message of the different versions. And that's not a correct, proper way to use version control. You need these descriptive commit messages. So we should not be dragging and dropping files to GitHub. So you can use the tools in PHP Storm, but I recommend using the commands. They're here on D2L until you get comfortable. One more resource for you. I actually created a little tutorial, separate tutorial here on kind of GitHub from the beginning. Okay, so a little kind of like LinkedIn learning style tutorial where I've introduced Git all the way from the very beginning, creating a repository, creating a README file. So just reviewing what all these things are and how to do it with a little quiz. Okay, so that link is also at the bottom of this item for you on D2L. So again, under Git commands and tutorial. So if you're not super comfortable with Git, this tutorial won't take you very long. It's not for marks, but it's here for you as a reference. And again, you're not just going to be using Git in my class, you're going to be using it all through your time here and then in your careers. Okay, I think that's it for today. Okay, Chris, that's here. If it keeps prompting you, run this command, git config -- global user.name, and then in quotes, put in your GitHub username. It should then store, it stores it in the Windows key store, and you won't get prompted repeatedly. So I actually put that in the tutorial here as well. Good question. Okay, so that's all for today. I know it was kind of a long class. Thank you for your patience and your participation today. So for next week, you do have your quiz and your assignment 1 due on Monday. That's it. Thanks for again, your attendance and all your participation and good work today. I hope you all have a great week, and I'll see you guys next week, our last class before reading week. Have a good week. Thanks, Sammy.